Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back once more to Horus Heresy Lore Breakdown, still on Deliverance Lost. And it is time we finally talked a bit about the Gene Seed, because I just finished Belisarius Cole's great work as well, just in case there were any additional hints in there, and, well, there kinda was and there kinda wasn't. I really didn't enjoy that book, by the way. It was far too laborious for me. I just don't know. I just did not find it particularly interesting, and I do not find Cole's character particularly interesting either. And his entire backstory was exactly as absurd as I thought it would be. I do not like Cole. It seems evident to me that he was created long before anyone actually thought as to why he would actually be created. So basically, they just made up a dude who could invent super space marines, and then later on when people asked, but how? They just kind of threw something together. And you have this ridiculous conglomerate of a vat-grown slave that ends up being a genius who mind melts with a scientist and then brain fucks him in an inexplicable fashion and then merges with Necron, and it's just... it is such a goddamn mess. It really is. But on the points of the Gene Seed. So, as far as I could tell from Deliverance Lost and the Great Work, he did not have access to the gene formula itself, although he was handed all of the information that Gilliman possessed. So, what exactly that was, we don't know, before he began his Primaris Marine project. So, Gilliman had presumably gathered up whatever information he could, and since this would be post-Heresy, he would have access to anything that was basically left, and potentially also access to Korak's research, at least what Korak's remembered, or perhaps written down in a report, or stuff like that. So it is possible that Cole had access to a fair bit of this genetic material, and he would also explain the speed with which he managed to perfect the Primarist formula, although it is not quite as quick as it was first indicated. There was a lengthy period of experimentation, although interestingly enough, not necessarily all that much in the way of failure. His one point of failure, his hubris, was the creation of a semi-Primarch, kinda? Like, he tried to make not a Primarch in and of itself. It is mentioned that not even he would have the hubris to try and replicate that part of the Emperor's work, but he tried to get as close as he could while still keeping it within the relative bounds of a superior space marine, which is interesting. Certainly. The fact that he would even try and dare to try, okay. And he also froze tens of thousands of individuals, or we don't even know how many. It's indicated that he may have frozen millions of individuals, who he then experimented upon, tens of thousands at the very least, and probably hundreds of thousands. And then carried out the Primaris formula on them, and then froze them again until Gilliman would eventually call upon them. Which, again, is one of those things like, okay, I mean, I get the idea of securing a large supply of test subjects, basically, when you are going to be doing this in secret. Again, how the fuck he kept this a secret, God Emperor only knows. But the fact that he kept them there... So he has millions of these. The Imperium goes through some of its darkest days, the arrival of the Beast, the arrival of the Hive fleets, and so on and so on. And Cole is never tempted to do this outside of the bounds of his original mission. And yet, the story seems to suggest that whilst Cole certainly respects Gilliman, he has far more respect for the Emperor's great work. He is a genuine Emperor botherer, as Cyphus Cain would call it, although he recognizes the Emperor for what he is, the first amongst equal, a human, albeit one of extraordinary intellect and power. And him just standing by during periods like the Great Beast? I don't know. I think Cole, the Great Work book, I think it made more questions than it necessarily answered in regards to Cole's personality and how he achieved this and why he chose to do it in this way and so on. But in regards to Deliverance Lost, I think it's safe to assume that Cole had access to some, but not all, of the information that Korax possessed. And some of the information he also possessed, therefore, might actually be incorrect, since Korax was not entirely... Korax didn't know at this point why the Raptors had suddenly mutated. He wasn't aware of the interference. He may have suspected it, possibly after the interference of the Alpha Legion, but we don't know if he actually figured that one out completely. But the fact that Cole probably had access to this information, and also had access to the information of a lot of individuals who helped the Emperor on the Astartes project, does make it more feasible that he could at the very least recreate it. Whether or not it explains how he managed to perfect it, well, I think that maybe is more attributed to the Raptor formula. But that as well is a little bit iffy, because at the end of the day, the Raptor formula was only unlocked because of the intervention of the Emperor's memories via Korax. So how he would have recreated this, again, it may have been that Guilliman's notes included Korax notes, in which case, you know, there you go. There you have the potential solution. But if that was the case, why did Cole have to undergo so much in the way of experimentation? And why did he end up with a formula that was quite different from the Raptors? The Primaris Marines are larger and stronger, but there are not that many suggestions of them being as superior as the Raptors, because you gotta remember again, the Raptors were superior to veteran Legionnaires right out of the box. You know, they were grown, and within hours they could take on a Legionnaire in mock battles. They again definitely did show some tactical naivete, as Korax put it, in open warfare, but nevertheless, they were superior Astartes without being massively different. You know, they were just Space Marines, but with some aspects of them pumped up and focused on. You know, in the same way that the Death Guard are much tougher than regular Space Marines. They weren't a separate or unique entity, they were just another variant on the Astartes formula, whereas the Primaris Marines come across as much more of their own unique creation, based upon the Emperor's work, absolutely, but taken in a very new and different direction as well. It's not like the differences between the original legions. This seems to be far more of a standalone product. It is, of course, also possible that Korax were only given the necessary pieces of the Space Marine formula, and he carried this out in the course of, you know, days and weeks, helped every step of the way by the Emperor's memories and his implanted recollections, whereas Cole had millennia, or at the very least centuries, to play around with the various formula. Which might explain why he decided to go further than Korax, and instead of making yet another variation, he decided to try and add in all of the various improvements. It is yet again also hinted that maybe he was playing around with traitor gene seed, which, again, if you took the various unique facets of all of the various legions and tried to combine one or two, or indeed possibly even all of them into one, then you probably would end up with a superior Legionnaire. The ferocity of the Space Wolves, the durability of the Death Guard, the psychic potential of the Thousand Suns, and so on and so on. At the end of the day, I think the great work made the creation of the Primaris Marines at least a little bit more believable, but they did so in a way that was in and of itself unbelievable, via the character of Cole, who at this point is little more than a walking plot device. I mean, for fuck's sake, he literally outwits a Catan at one point, which is just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead, why not at this point? But it also appears as if his research is at best tangentially related to the gene seed that we see here being improved upon in Deliverance Lost. So, that is my conclusions on the gene seed and the Raptor formula and how they might play off one another. So let's move back on into the book itself, shall we? So last time, Omegon had had a little bit of a panic attack, realizing that there might be hundreds and possibly thousands of raptors being produced in Ravendelve, and he had received a potential solution to the problem via a tech priest of the Order of the Dragon, which turned out to be a demonic monstrosity, which was then introduced into the gene seed and resulted in catastrophic mutations throughout the raptors' last batch. This, of course, came as a bit of a surprise to Korax and his crew, but at the same time, it was also exactly the thing they had all kind of been expecting. Dreading, obviously, but also expecting. The stuff they were dealing with here was highly complicated, volatile, and they barely knew what they were doing. The fact that the first batch of raptors had been such an absolute unqualified success had almost certainly hit them with a sense of surprise, honestly. And think about it. If you're sitting there thinking like, oh god, this is impossible, and then you succeed right out the bat, and then afterwards you fail, your first thought then isn't going to be sabotage, is it? It's going to be, fuck. I goddamn knew we couldn't be that lucky. And that, of course, is exactly what happened to the Raven Guard. They first started looking inwards. Did we do anything wrong? What did we do different? Could it be the gene seed? Could it have been degraded? What could have degraded? And so they began researching this. And that, of course, would give Omegon all the time in the world to set into motion the next step of his plan. First and foremost, he was to launch a distraction. Or more correctly, the Order of the Dragon was to launch one. Omegon had expected something like a minor Gilder uprising, some infighting amongst the various temples, a commotion that might draw the Raven Guard's attention. What the Order of the Dragon delivered was a major civil war incursion, including the deployment of an Imperator Titan. Right. I guess even the Alpha Legion can be caught by surprise occasionally. But of course the surprise was even greater for the Raven Guard. Our little Alfarius, who has been questioning his allegiance just a little bit, has clearly not been pushed quite so far as to consider any change in actual allegiance, since when the signal sounds, he immediately acts as he was told to do, starting off by killing 2 Raven Guard legionnaires and then making his way to the main gateway control area, where he has been instructed to try and take it over and open the gates to reinforcements coming in from outside. And in addition to the Alpha Legionnaire reinforcements, we also have the infiltrators revealed. And yet again, we're getting beaten over the head by the statement, Agapito's a traitor, Agapito's a traitor, listen to me, ree! No, he isn't. They really are making it way too obvious. Again, this is the problem with the Alpha Legion. If you start hitting people over the head with it, it doesn't work. Especially in these circumstances where you're practically trained through other books and movies and games and everything to look at the one that is most suspicious and go, yeah, game's trying too hard. This is a good boy right here. Though, again, Agapito is acting retardedly suspiciously, I gotta admit. He can't even... The fact that none of the... So, Bran and Agapito both have their own suspicions. Bran of Agapito and Agapito of, well, somebody else infiltrating. Neither of them take this to Korax. Which is just great. Really? You don't think the Primarch might want to know about this? Like, oh, well, all I have is suspicions. Yes, I know, but you're guarding one of the most vital pieces of genetic knowledge in the entire galaxy. And you don't think that Korax might want to know about your suspicions? Oh. Oh well, I mean, they tried, I suppose. Korax too briefly considers destroying the gene tech, although right now, with the raptors in the mutated state they are in, the gene tech is his only hope to fix them. And Dawn did warn him of pity for his legionnaires, but it's one thing to say that you are ready to sacrifice everything. It is quite a different thing to actually do it, though Bran has taken the measure to ensure that, Well, there is always an option. He has popped up into orbit and is currently aiming the bombardment cannons of a battleship towards Ravendelv. You know, just in case. No half measures, that Bran. And it might turn out to be necessary as well, though. Oh, Jesus. So, there's a couple other things as well. Bran is ready to glass the entire site, but I wonder if he is aware that, apparently, the Raven Guard have also moved their entire gene seed stock to Ravendelv. I don't know if this is a little bit of a logical oversight by the author, or if Bran is literally ready to just torch absolutely everything, but, well, because if that goes up in smoke as well, yeah, at that point, the Raven Guard's Legion really is finished. Finito, fully and completely. But the Alpha Legion infiltrators have met up with the reinforcements. They have moved down into the Apothecarium. They have secured the Gene Seed Sample, which Alfarius, the original Alfarius, there are 3 of them now, notes that it looks different compared to the first time when he mixed in the demon thing with it. That is an interesting thing. So, the Magos of the Order of the Dragon said that it would be an easy task to separate the demon contaminant from the gene seed sample, but will it really? That's what I'm wondering. Warp tech. Oh yes, it'll do this. Totally. 5 minutes later. Oh, I didn't expect this to happen. Well, such is life. And seeing as the Alpha Legion isn't an unstoppable super force of 1 billion legionnaires in modern day 40k, I suspect something happened. Oh yes, indeed. However, at this point in time, their betrayal is still unknown to all but a certain commander, and when they delve into the depths, they overcome any remaining resistance, of which there is basically none, and they get the gene seed sample. They also then get further instructions from Omegon to dump it in what is presumably a blind drop for another operative to gather. That's obviously being Omegon himself. And then the Alpha Legionnaires are ordered to reroute to the gene seed storage and burn all of that as well, making sure that whatever happens, the Raven Guard will not be able to recover from this attack. So, clearly, the Alpha Legion are, they're changing their plans a little bit. Originally, Omegon was dreaming up the idea of perhaps taking the place of the Raven Guard as well, but surely this attack will be reported, and if the Raven Guard then has a sudden resurgence, then they'll call their bluff. I don't know. It feels like the author is forgetting some of his own plot points here, because a while ago, Omegon was like, okay, here's my idea. We're going to steal the Gene Seed tech, then we're going to secretly dispose of the Raven Guard, and then we're going to take their place on Deliverance and Kievar after aiding the Gilder Uprising, I suppose, and then we will masquerade as the Raven Guard and cause all kinds of havoc and confusion, but now they're going to be retreating, even though the Order of the Dragon provided an even bigger distraction than they originally thought. Now they are happy with just grabbing it and then fleeing. Interesting. I mean, maybe it was just a flight of Omegon's fancy to begin with, but he seems to have changed his tune somewhat drastically. Nevertheless, if they manage to torch the gene seed, that will, as mentioned, be it. That will be everything done and over for the Raven Guard. Unfortunately for the Alpha Legion, they have not countered with the presence of the Raptors. Whilst most of them, in fact all of the latest batch, have been almost debilitatingly so mutated, there are still quite a few of them who have not been completely hampered by their mutations. And upon discovering Raven Guard Legionnaires, quote-unquote, that fire upon them as soon as they see them, and the mangled body of the Apothecary Six, I don't even know what the hell his name is. It's written yet pronounced in the audiobook in such an odd way that I'm not even entirely sure. What I am sure of, however, is that the Raptors, for all of their problems, all of their mutations, and all of their unfortunate fate, are able to, in the end, save the Raven Guard by driving off the Alpha Legion before they can destroy the gene seed. The Raven Guard saved by mutants. I mean, incidental mutants, to be fair, but still, quite the turn of events. The remaining Alpha Legionnaires attempted to flee, but they were stopped by Agapito. Because of course. And the Custodes. He had apparently long suspected that there were Alpha Legionnaires, or infiltrators at least, of some sort or another, within the Raven Guard ranks. Again, he even had evidence, but didn't bring it to Corax because reasons. He did, however, manage to stop them, and he did manage to lock down Ravendelve. And when the dust settled, the Custodes informed Corax that they were fairly sure they knew what had happened. They figured the Legion must have been infiltrated, and that the only ones who could have done so were the Alpha Legion. Corax then came up with the solution to the problem of finding Alpha Legionnaires and distinguishing them from Raven Legionnaires by having each and every individual undergo extensive gene scanning. Armed with the knowledge he now possessed, Corax, after all, knew that each one of his sons bore a unique gene marker, which would not be found within the Alpha Legion. Realizing that the game was well and truly up, the remaining Alpha Legionnaires still attempting to masquerade either tried to slip out, and most of them were gunned down, indeed all of them, as far as we are aware, or they took their own lives, so as to deny their secrets to the Raven Guard. But Omegon escaped, in a way that I find extremely unconvincing as well, mind you. See, sometimes it is better to just let the Alpha Legion do their bullshit instead of explaining it. If you have arrived at a situation in which you can't find a satisfying explanation, then doing a little bit of a hand wave on occasion might still be better. Apparently, Omegon had disguised himself as a combat servitor, and then snuck into Ravendelve, retrained the gene tech, and then snuck out again pretending to be a gun servitor all the way, a so-called Heracles. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that's a pattern that exists, Heracles. At least I haven't heard of it. And here's a real big problem. Maybe this would just be a local pattern. Okay, fair enough, there's a ton of those. But these are all heavily modified servitors. They're not just gene-bred servants, they are servitors. In other words, they are filled with all manners of piping and instruments and metal parts and augments, etc., etc., etc. They don't look human in the slightest. And if this is indeed a servitor the size of a space marine, then that's probably closer to the Praetorians, which, again, you will never mistake a Praetorian for a normal human. And apparently all Omegon has to do to pass for a servitor is adopt a lumbering gait. Like, fuck you. Fuck you. No, I don't buy that for a second. Not for a goddamn second. Hell, if the servitor had a uniform, then the odds of this uniform fitting an Adeptus Astartes snugly, again with all of those modifications, are pretty much zero. And if they don't have a uniform, if they're, for example, half naked or uncovered or just wearing a cloak or something like that, then Omegon's black carapace would give him away. And regardless, his lack of overt augmentations would once again give him away. I cannot imagine for a second that these enslaved servitors would be unaugmented. It's a really annoying little thing there, because again, with the Alpha Legion, you gotta be so careful with how you implement them. And by and large, this book has done a very good job of it. Just this last part is really unsatisfying. Anywho, Corax decides, after having been urged to do so as well by his commanders and the Custodes, that the gene experiment has to stop here. It is too risky. They can't allow them to get away with the gene tech, which, interesting. So, Omega has the gene tech, and yet they're talking as if they almost escaped with the gene tech. Have they put in place like a duplicate, I guess? Have they made a copy of it? But that doesn't seem to make sense either. Because Omega has the gene tech, right? And they're acting as if they didn't get away with it. Are they assuming that it was destroyed? Why would they assume that? Now, surely, with the sensitivity of this information and the possibility of it having leaked, the entire system should be shut down immediately, surely. And the Alpha Legion does not possess the deflector field technology, and supposedly the Beta is in system. A goddamn battle barge is in system. And Omega still has to extract via Thunderhawk, apparently, all the way back to the Beta. It doesn't make any sense how he'd escape a full system lockdown. And again, surely they would throw up such a net immediately, just on the slightest suspicion that someone may have escaped. It just... This ending is really, really poorly written. And even if Korax just kind of assumes that they haven't escaped, or they've placed in a suitable double, which I can't imagine how they did. I don't get this. I don't get this one. Hell, even if they assumed nothing was wrong, surely they would initiate a full security lockdown of absolutely goddamn everything, because they know for a fact they've just been infiltrated by the goddamn Alpha Legion. Surely that doesn't end with just a lockdown of Ravendelve? I mean, come on. Again, the best part is the Custodians start by... So the reason why the Custodians figured, they think they know what happened here and like, it must be the Alpha Legion, is because they say, yes, our sole purpose is to halt such infiltration. I'm like, you pieces of fucking shit. You absolute pieces of shit. Again, the Custodians, why do they have to be portrayed as such utter morons all the time? This was a big deal in the Lorgar book as well, where these these people who live and breathe infiltration and counter-infiltration, they can't even figure out that their messages are being fucking spoofed. I fucking hate the way the Custodians are treated. I really do hate it, but the problem is, and this is a problem throughout a lot of the Horus Heresy series, it attributes so much intelligence and planning and scheming and deviancy, I mean, yeah, yes, I guess, on the side of the traitors. And it attributes so little on the side of the loyalists. Right, anyways, yeah, never mind. Korax decides that, okay, yeah, it's too dangerous. We're gonna purge everything, which, makes some sense, I guess. Again, at least you would return it to Terra or something, but never mind. But again, though, this is also the mind of a Primarch, so records would nevertheless remain. Primarchs and hell, just regular Astartes have perfect recall. Purging the data from the cogitators, that's not going to actually get rid of all of it. Korax would still know, and his Astartes, anyone exposed to it, would also know. Now, Six, of course, is dead, but Korax, again, would know, which would mean that he could still pass on his notes to Gilliman at some point in the future, potentially, but, who knows. I really like this book. This is a really good book, but this part near the end here really grinds my gears. Anywho, we're not quite done yet. We still have a little bit of Alfarius nonsense to go through, and Korax is adamant that the assault upon the Emperor's Children's so-called Perfect Fortress will still go ahead, despite a lot of his commanders saying that, are you sure about this? The Perfect Fortress the name is not just for show, and we don't have that much in the way of manpower, especially now that the Raptors have been so much reduced. But again, Korax is adamant. He is convinced that part of the reason why all this fuckery happened in the first place is because the Raven Guard had to engage in a form of warfare they were unfamiliar with. All this secrecy and inactivity does not work well with the Raven Guard. And, I mean, you can hardly argue with that, can you? And so the assault was launched upon the perfect fortress, created by Fulgrim in a rather amusing fashion. Essentially, Fulgrim had come to the conclusion that the best way to protect the civilian populace in the case of a siege was to have there be no civilian populace by turning the entire populace into a militia force. I mean, yes, that will result in 0 civilian casualties, I agree. It'll result in a lot of militia casualties, but fucking details, I do suppose. And hey, the Emperor's children weren't bad at creating fortifications either. They perfected that in as many ways as they perfected any other form of warfare. In this case, perhaps their aesthetics were biting them a little bit, though. The Therian cohorts, the Imperial Army formation under the command of the Raven Guard, advance upon the city in an obvious and retarded fashion, which the Emperor's children garrison, of course, never questions. They manage to defeat the Therian cohort quite easily, and as the Therian cohorts begin to disengage from the defenses, the Emperor's children, of course, charge out. Makes sense, obviously, and this is clearly what you would do. And that's when the Raven Guards strike, using their reflect shields to approach the city low orbit without any kind of warning. They're suddenly down on top of the Emperor's children, who have now left all of their fixed defenses behind. Well, there you go, I suppose. And that's also where we get the confirmation that Korax is literally invisible, as the commander of the Emperor's Children garrison describes a scene where his command squad are cut down to the last man whilst firing into thin air. So he is staring straight down into this slaughter, and he doesn't see a damn thing, until Korax is right on top of him, literally centimeters away, at which point he finally notices. Again, that shit ain't stealth. After this, the Emperor's Children garrison is quickly mopped up with a convincing victory for the Raven Guard, including the deployment of the both successful and deformed Raptor forces. Korax having decided that the Raptors are not to be put out of their misery, instead they will be allowed to face death in the manner most befitting that of an Astartes, in open battle. After conquering the city, however, he pronounces that he's not intending to hold it. In fact, holding it would not only be pointless, it would be counterproductive. Instead, the Therian cohorts would receive further reinforcements, another 500,000 men, and the Raven Guard would immediately leave to strike another target, before Horus presumably had even heard about this one. He admits that this is not going to be a very gentle strategy. The Raven Guard will be the cutting edge, striking at every point that they can determine is weak enough to be overwhelmed with a minimal loss of Legionnaire life. As now that he's going to have to replenish his numbers the good old-fashioned way, that's going to be very, very, very slow indeed. I'm sure the legions will probably, lower standards a little bit here and there, put the scouts into the front line and such things, but even then it's gonna take a long goddamn time for the Raven Guard to regain anything even remotely close to their original strength. Hell, a fraction of it will take them quite a lot of time. In the meantime, they will seize whatever objective they can and leave behind Imperial Army holding forces, who will then almost inevitably get thoroughly violated. But since they will be able to take over defensive positions and prepared positions as well, in the case of the Perfect Fortress, although it is much reduced, they will be able to make a proper accounting of themselves. And hey, that's another part of the strategy. The Raven Guard bleed them on the offensive and then force the enemy to retake their lost ground, running face first into yet further defenses. It's not the gentlest of strategies, but it is most certainly effective, and it will, in all due likelihood, slow down Horus's war machine. And speaking of the big old War Master, his plans also are unveiled, at least in part here. Alfarius returns to the fleet and presents the War Master with the gene tech, which is immediately handed over to Fabius Bile. However, it is not the real gene tech. Alfarius reveals as much a little bit later, when he states that he kept the proper copy for himself and worked in some fatal flaws into the version he gave to Fabius Bile, ensuring that Fabius would waste countless hours and countless lives in pursuing a goal that would basically be impossible. In fact, the blueprint he would be working from would be actively working against him. Quite sneaky, I gotta say. How the hell he manages to come up with a... well, I mean, he is a Primarch, I suppose, but I don't know if he was overly specialized in, well, gene tech. Fabius is not an amateur at this, but we'll just take Alfarius' word for it. Horus, however, his plans are a bit more wide-reaching, as mentioned. First and foremost, he's going to strike against the Ultramarines at Calth, which is going to be the next book, which is actually one of my favorite books in the Horus Heresy series, really. And he also states that he wishes to bring the Blood Angels on board, which is rather interesting, is it not? Because both sides seems to be utterly convinced that the Angel would undoubtedly side with them. Now, the book about the Blood Angels, it's a book that I'm not actually that fond of, but, well, we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, Alfarius returns to his quarters, oh so very pleased with himself, where the Cabal's ambassador is still waiting. It whizzes and rages impotently at Alfarius, complaining that he's not following the plan. Alfarius takes the little alien, brings it down to an airlock, and shunts it out into space. The Alpha Legion is now fully rogue, which is interesting. I mean, God, the whole Cabal thing is just so... On the one hand, I absolutely get that the Alpha Legion would want to separate themselves from the Cabal and do whatever they felt was right and get the maximum benefit for themselves. Absolutely, that's entirely understandable. They hate the Xenos just as much as any other Imperial servants, but again, what they were shown was scary enough to make them turn against the Emperor when they would have been in a perfect position to actually change course of events by intervening directly. Hell, even just joining with the traitors and then backstabbing them in orbit, as mentioned, that would have been massive. But instead, they're like, oh no, we can't do that. That wouldn't have enough of an effect. But breaking with the Cabal after a couple months of cooperation, that's fine. What could these Xenos filth possibly teach us? It's just... The Cabal has enough influence, enough convincing arguments to make the Alpha Legion turn in the first place, but not enough to keep them loyal beyond the span of a week or so. Slight, reductio ad absurdum there, but that is basically what happens here, which is just kind of infuriating. And so now the Alpha Legion are completely rogue. They're not fighting for the War Master, they're not fighting for the Emperor, they're not fighting for the Cabal, they're fighting for themselves? Presumably, though even that's a bit of an odd one, but there you go. This book. It's not a bad read, by no stretch of the imagination, but it has some really derpy moments in it, and again, the Alpha Legion. I mean, this book does the Alpha Legion pretty well, but as satisfying as the scene is when Alfarius just flushes that damn little alien out of the airlock, it's just... they turned so suddenly, and now they turn so suddenly again. The Alpha Legion needs to be treated with a great deal of delicacy, and I feel like they're starting to forget that. Anywho, I think there are a few rather interesting little tidbits here, less pertaining to the Primaris Marines, I think, than we might originally believe. Maybe that'll be revealed a little bit further. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the gene tech in the hands of the Alpha Legion, though, because, again, seeing as there aren't millions of Alpha Legionnaires running around the galaxy, we can fairly safely presume that they fucked up somehow, which hopefully we'll be told about in the future. Anywho, that is all for today. That is the wrap for Book 18, Deliverance Lost. And next up will be the Mark of Kauth. Or, wait, no, it's not actually called the Mark of Kauth, it's called, oh, God, I can't remember now. But I'm sure I'll figure it out before I start recording. Anywho, until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.